Hi, I'm Thomas. I'm the lead engineer at Giant Software. Today I'm going to show you guys some updates made to our in-house developed game engine. People often ask why we are not using Unreal or some comparable engine. They ask why we go through all the pain of coding everything ourselves. So there's no doubt using an existing engine such as Unreal would solve a lot of problems and also would provide a lot of features just out of the box. However, Farming Simulator has some special requirements which would make adapting existing engines quite difficult. For instance, the dynamic and static foliage system, which is fully synchronized in our engine, would be very difficult to implement or adapt in existing engines. Also, our vehicles have quite demanding requirements which cannot be simulated by physics systems of other engines. Apart from this, we have also other reasons which goes beyond just the features. Namely, we want to decide when and what features change during the development. This is especially important to make modding as simple as possible. Also, with other engines, modding wouldn't be even possible, or at least not in that extent we are offering it. So in the latest Giant's engine, we added some new features for you guys. We added DirectX 12 support on PC. We have like the new optimization techniques, like the texture streaming system, occlusion quality, and various other graphics features. Farming Simulator 22 is going to be shipped using DirectX 12 API. This allows us to write more efficient code and to reduce the CPU overhead we had with the previous rendering APIs. DirectX 12 also allows us to use more cores. Texture streaming allows us to put more details onto our maps, and we no longer need to make sure that we can load all full resolution textures from the beginning. So in previous Farming Simulator version, we always loaded all the textures in the GPU memory at the very beginning. This is basically a good approach if you have enough GPU memory. But if you have like very high quality textures or even too many textures, the game gonna crash or you end up with a very low frame rate. The lack of the texture streaming system in previous Farming Simulator version was the main reason for the relatively restricting garage slot system we had on consoles. Occlusion Quality basically prevents the engine from performing expensive rendering computation of completely hidden objects. For a better understanding, let me show you guys an example in our editor. So this is a very simple scene I've prepared you guys to show how occlusion culling roughly works. For instance, here we have like a big wall which can potentially hide other objects, right? It makes sense to have this wall set as an occluder. And if I place now the camera right behind the wall, I can't see the spheres behind, right? The occlusion culling system decides now that there is no need to compute these three spheres. And this can be checked here in our rendering stats. As you can see here, the occluded shape counts increase to 3. And we have one occluded geometry here. So I can move slightly the camera to the side until a sphere becomes visible here. Here we have the occluded shape count decreases to 2. And this is what occlusion culling does. And it also only makes sense to have occluded geometry for very big objects, of course, right? Only big objects can potentially hide others. Also worth mentioning is that in Farming Simulator 22, the terrain is also acting as an occluded geometry. The terrain occluded geometry is automatically generated and updated. Giant's engine uses a high-quality TAA algorithm by default, but it can also disable if you don't like the result or for performance reasons. In previous games, we enabled MSAA as a default anti-aliasing technique. Compared to MSAA, TAA leads usually to better results. To show you better the difference between these two approaches, let me show you guys an example here in the game. Even with MSAA on, there are a lot of visible specular highlights flickering ongoing on this vehicle here. All these metal bars here suffering quite a lot of this rendering artifact. Now let's enable TAA and see how the image looks like. As you see, with TAA on, specular highlights glitches are gone, so it's really a notable improvement. We also added parallax occlusion mapping to all terrain textures. Parallax occlusion mapping is a real-time technique to approximate displacement mapping. It's a technique to approximate geometric details without the cost of the actual geometry. So let's compare the difference between having parallax occlusion calling on and off. For instance, here we have a little path here on the terrain which has a lot of stones on it. So currently we have the parallax occlusion system turned off, and even though we have a normal map applied here on the terrain, it still looks a bit boring and flat. It doesn't look really 3D. Now let's activate the parallax occlusion calling. It looks way more interesting. Everything is kind of like popping out of the scene. We also improved the shadow map renderings quite a lot. One of the most notable changes there is that we are now able to render the shadows much further away. That actually really helps to improve the visual quality and distance. We even see the shadows in the very far distance. For instance, the trees here are dropping shadows everywhere. Let's compare with the previous solution we had in 19. There is no shadow in the distance at all. So I think this is really a big improvement regarding the visual quality. Apart from the features I've presented you guys, we also worked on other stuff like the traffic vehicle AI system, pedestrians system, and we also added some new multiplayer feature which hasn't been announced yet. And yeah, I guess that's it. That's all from the engineering team. I wish you guys a lot of fun on FarmCon 21 and see you soon. Cheers!